Good day, everybody. My name is Al Stammers, and I have the pleasure of continuing the AMSEC Perfusion Pioneer series. Today, we have an absolute, a true pioneer, an individual who's been involved in perfusion for several, almost 5 decades, if not longer. And, um, and that individual who I'm interviewing right now is, of course, well known to all of us, and that is Mr. Gary Grist. And Gary has a phenomenal background that we're going to get into and ask him about many aspects of his career. But before we start as a perfusionist type of questions, I'd like to have Gary give us a little bit of background about his own life in the pre-perfusion years. It's always interesting to hear from individuals of what they did in their high school, even pre-high school days before they went to college or university. So Gary, again, thank you so much for agreeing to this interview today. And I'd like to begin by asking you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? For example, where you grew up and what your early years were like and what were some of your interests before you entered into college?
Well, I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri. I went to Southwest High School in Kansas City. It was a good high school in Kansas City, Missouri. Um, I got interested in biology when I was in high school. And when I was a senior in high school, I got a job as a part-time orderly at St. Luke's Hospital here in Kansas City, Missouri. And that was a really tough job. They ran my ass off, if I could say that, in that job, moving a lot of people and helping with people in traction. And I had care for 7 patients every day when I was working there. Plus, they pulled me all over the hospital to do all other kinds of things, put Foley's in men and help them in and out of traction and that kind of stuff. So it was a lot of work. So I got tired of working so hard. So I started looking for another job. And there was an ad from the same hospital for a special technical services technician. So I answered that ad. I didn't know what a special technical service technician was, but they didn't say I had to have any experience. So when I was 18, I applied for that job and I got that job. And that started me kind of on my perfusion career. I had a couple of hiccups along the way, but that started me because special technical services was a new division of hospital where they were hiring technicians to do all kinds of things, including running the open heart pump. I ran the open heart pump. I performed hemodialysis on people. I learned to run the hyperbaric unit. I learned to do EEGs. I learned to do EKGs. And I even worked in the GI lab. The only thing I didn't like was the GI lab. But I pulled up this background because this is a picture taken by Denton Cooley in an article he wrote about doing heart surgery in the 1960s, which is when I started in 1968. So if I can show you this, there's a table. You can see there's a lot of blood on that table waiting to be used. And if you look above that open heart pump, there's 4 units of blood running in to prime the pump. And if you look at the perfusionist here, she doesn't have any personal protective gear on, no gloves, no warm-up jackets to cover her sleeves, no eye protection. I don't know what kind of pump that was. I think it's a American Optical, but I'm not sure. And there's a disc oxygenator. That's what I used to use. And another important thing to point out in here is this. You see back there in the background, there's a glass bottle. All the IVs were glass bottles, and those IVs caused a lot of damage, not in the OR so much, but in patients in general, because they had an air siphon on them. So if the bottle ran dry, the patient got a big air ambulance. And it hurt a lot of patients and killed some patients too, but not in the OR because we were always watching them. But when they were out on the floors, they were that way. So this is what my operating room would look like that I started working in back in 1968. And that's why I brought it up, just to set the mood for that. So that's how I got started in this. And that was my early education. And initially, I wanted to be a oceanographer because I was really infatuated with the Jacques Cousteau stuff. But I decided that I couldn't afford to go to La Jolla or to Woods Hole universities. I didn't have enough money, so I had to stay in Kansas City. So I worked at this job at St. Luke's for several years, learning to do all these things, these open heart procedures, the hemodialysis procedures, and the other things. I had a really good mentor, a guy named Jerry Sweat, who was a ex-Marine corpsman who somehow learned all this stuff. I don't know where he learned it, but he taught it to me. And he was kind of my mentor when I first started. So first I didn't know what I wanted to do. And then I decided I kind of wanted to stay with this perfusion business. And so that's how I got started in the St. Luke's. And after that, I worked there for 3 years, from 68 to 72. And then for 2 years, I went to work for a hemodialysis company. They hired me to set up and train nurses in their hemodialysis machines, set up units, hemodialysis units all over the country. So I traveled all over the country for 2 years. That was a fun job. I liked doing that. I liked meeting all the new people, but it was part of my family because I was gone 4, sometimes 5 nights a week. So I quit that job after 2 years and went back to work at St. Luke's Hospital. And I worked there for about a year and I got serum hepatitis. And I like to say that my eyes were yellow and my stools were white for 9 months. I was pretty sick. I thought I might be going to die, and I was pretty sure it was going to end my career. Incidentally, see all that blood on the unit on the table there? Every 5th unit of that was contaminated with serum hepatitis. That was the frequency that patients got hepatitis from blood transfusions back then. So they can test for that now, but they couldn't test for it back then. And so I had to leave my career, I had to leave the job in 75. And I thought my perfusion career was over then. I went to work in the real estate business and I did fine until they started raising mortgage rates to 18%. And you can't sell many houses when the mortgage rate is 18%. So I started looking for another job. And I saw an ad in the newspaper from the local children's hospital. They were looking for a clinical perfusionist. And I said, hey, I can do that. And so I applied for that job and I got hired on that job. And that's how I got started.
Great. Well, let's go back though and talk a little bit about your education before we get into perfusion, Gary, if
Okay.
that's all right. So, as you said, you graduated from the University of Missouri, and you had a bachelor's of science degree. And now, was this in oceanography or was it something
No,
biological sciences?
just in biology with a minor in chemistry.
Gotcha, gotcha. And you weren't planning on med school. You were saying you were going to the ocean, and obviously in Kansas City, not many oceans close by. So going to the coast was your only option.
Well, when I started, that's what I wanted to do. But after I worked at St. Luke's in perfusion for a while, I decided that that's what I wanted to do. So I didn't have the grades and I didn't have the money to go to medical school. So I thought I wanted to do something that would make a difference in people's lives, not just study octopus, but to actually do something to help people. And so I thought perfusion was an exciting, interesting way to do it. And it was a new science. 68 may seem like it's pretty old since 53, but it was still new science. We didn't really know what the hell we were doing. And we just did our best. Jerry Sweat, who was teaching me, did his best to teach me all about safety. Anyway, I got a degree in biology, and then in the mid '80s, I got my nursing degree. I went back and got a nursing degree because at that time when you worked in healthcare, nurses ran the healthcare system. So if you didn't have an RN, people didn't pay much attention to you. So I decided to get an RN, and I did that.
Now, Gary, thank you. And as we continue on with your education, you've been a practicing perfusionist since the late 1960s, but I see that you went to perfusion school. You went up to Portland and went to St. Vincent's Hospital and Medical Center, and that was in 1991. And I wonder why. I believe you might have already been a certified perfusionist, right? Because the grandfather clauses?
I wasn't certified. I was certified at that point, and I decided in 1990 that I needed to go ahead and get certified. I missed the deadline for the grandfathering because I was sick with hepatitis. So I missed the grandfathering thing that the academy offered. So after I went back to work as a perfusionist, I decided I needed to go ahead and get certified, and I was managed to get into an abbreviated program up in Portland, Oregon. Greg Myling was the director, and he was kind enough to invite me and said I could do cases all day and then go to classes at night. And so I got out in 6 months.
Was Dr. Starr still practicing at that time?
But many cases for Dr. Starr. He kind of amazed me. I mean, I was awestruck by him. He says he invented the heart valve. Well, he invented one of the earliest ones, but he was great. But he was so slow for a famous heart surgeon. I thought, man, you are so slow. I don't mean to drive him. He's not with us anymore. But he was a great guy. He was very nice. He was wonderful. He lectured us in the classes, and I like Dr. Starr.
Gary, let's follow that for a little bit, because obviously very few of us who got the breadth of experience that you have in the years as a perfusionist. If you actually do the math, you're well over 50 years. And while you retired, we'll get to that in a little bit, some time ago, I really don't think you're retired from perfusion. All that you've done in the years that you left the clinic are probably more busy than you were as a practicing perfusionist. But the question I have for you is, over those years, the formative years of cardiac surgery and cardiopulmonary bypass, you must have met some very prominent physicians as well as perfusionists. Let's start with the physicians. Can you tell us others that you may have heard at meetings, obviously that are no longer with us besides Dr. Starr? And then I'll ask you about perfusionist.
Well, I met Dr. Cooley and at a meeting, and he was a nice gentleman. I heard a lot of stories about him from other perfusionists, but I never did any work with him. And I also met Dr. DeBakey. He was kind of an impressive guy, very serious, I thought. I met him, but I never did pump any cases for him. But I met those two guys. The two guys I really loved were the ones I worked for when I started at Children's, which is Thomas Holder and Keith Ashcraft. They weren't well known as heart surgeons. They both trained at Great Ormond Street in England, but they were world renowned as pediatric general surgeons. Also did heart surgery. So those are two guys I really liked. I pumped cases for Dr. Reed in Kansas City, and two other surgeons, not well known, Henry and Graham at St. Luke's. Pumped cases for them. So those are the guys that I came in contact with that I knew the best.
Yeah, clearly some very, very prominent surgeons, well known to all of us. Now let's talk about perfusionists, because back in the 60s and 70s, there probably weren't a lot of opportunities to go to meetings as there are today. AMSAC began, of course, and that was out there. I don't think the Academy was up at the time in the 60s, but clearly correct me if I'm wrong. Who are some of the prominent perfusionists that you had the opportunity to meet, speak with, or share ideas back in the 60s and 70s?
Well, I didn't go to a lot of meetings, so I didn't meet a lot of people. I met Charlie, I can't remember his last name. I'm getting old. You know who I'm talking about. Everyone knows Charlie is. And
Charlie Reed.
You're right. And let's see, Thomas Musiani, Kelly Hedlund, Pete Peterson, David Holt, and Eileen Heller Standing. Those are some of the people that I've been in contact with and have met over the years. So I'm probably in contact with Kelly more than anybody. He's probably the most prominent historian for perfusion there was. But I didn't go to a lot of meetings, so I didn't get a chance. I was doing so much work at the hospital, I couldn't get away. They just they wouldn't let me go, and they never wanted to pay for it, so I would have had to pay for it out of my pocket. So in the 60s, 60s and 70s, I didn't go very many places. I made a lot of perfusionists.
Right, and that's pretty normal back there. And the individuals who you've named are well known again to all of us in the field, and are very prominent, as yourself is. But I want to shift and talk about your RN. You went back and got your RN degree in 1987. And obviously, you've won awards for outstanding nursing throughout your career. Can you tell us, how is the having been a registered, still are a registered nurse, how has that assisted you to become a better perfusionist, or how does that improved your knowledge and experiences above and beyond what a normal, say, CCP who wasn't a nurse would have had?
Well, I think over the years there's been some animosity between perfusionists and nurses in the operating room. I might be just a rumor, but I've heard that before. But becoming a nurse allowed me, where I worked, the perfusion people were under the nursing department. And so we had to more or less take orders from the nurses and the director of nurses. So I thought that becoming a nurse, I could fit in better and participate in other things. Plus, I could do other things that non-nurses weren't allowed to do. Like I could circulate surgery, I could scrub surgery, I could. I got involved with sickle cell. I had a sickle cell transfusion clinic that I did 2 days a week for 4 years, and I got started in ECMO. I didn't have to be a nurse to start an ECMO, but it helped to be part of that consortium, who was made primarily of nurses. So, and plus, I like doing the other things that nurses do. So, I like to take care of patients and help them as best as I can instead of just sitting behind a pump all day long.
Interesting. Now, before we get into your years at Children's Mercy Hospital in Kansas City, you mentioned that you used to, this was a few minutes ago, that you used to scrub and circulate and run the pump. Were there any days where you were actually doing two of those or three of those? Such as I have heard stories where a perfusionist would scrub in and take vein and then go and operate the heart-lung machine. Did that ever happen in your career where you were helping first assist open the chest and then go and run the pump?
Well, not at St. Luke's Hospital, because I was doing those other duties I told you about, running the pump, hemodialysis, hyperbaric. But at Children's Mercy Hospital, when I was hired there, they made it clear I would have to do other things besides just run the pump. So for the surgeons I would work for, a typical day for them would they would do a heart procedure in the morning, and then in the afternoon they might do as many as 10 other surgeries, pediatric surgeries, everything from PDAs to BT shunts to inguinal hernias and fundoplications and all that kind of stuff. So I'd scrub for them on those cases, and then on some of those cases I would circulate, and then when they weren't working, I would scrub and circulate for the orthopods and other people like that. At that time, there wasn't any insurance for kids. Children's Mercy Hospital, our patients rarely had any insurance. So a lot of the surgical work and work the doctors did was pro bono. I remember our neurosurgeon, he spent one day a week at Mercy, and that was pro bono. And he was putting in shunts, the cerebral shunts all day long on those kids. But then in the 1990s, the CHIPS Act was passed, so the hospital started getting some health insurance payments from the state of Missouri, and the hospital really expanded very fast after we started getting that income. But before then, I was kind of a jack of all trades at both hospitals. It was just expected, and I know you experienced this too, Al. As a perfusionist, we were just expected to do anything, anything we were asked to do, and that's how I got involved with sickle cell transfusion, exchange transfusions, and ECMO, and I even worked in the urology department for quite a few years doing urodynamic testing. Urodynamic testing equipment had a roller pump on it, so my surgeon said, "Hey, it's got a roller pump, so you're doing this." So that was pretty tough doing urodynamics on a 3-year-old.
Wow.
So I did a variety of things, and that helped me as nurses because I could chart better as a nurse. I learned more about charting, and I had a nursing license which protected me in a way. I never got sued for anything, but it was nice that I was protected and the hospital was protected because I was licensed.
Wow, that's a very good point, and we'll probably touch on that in a few minutes. Let's talk about children's a little bit more, though, because clearly that's where you spent the majority of your career. I assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you first took the position, you weren't hired as the chief, although you may have been with your experience at St. Luke's and other facilities. So if you can contrast that, let's say you did come in as a staff perfusionist and then became a chief perfusionist. What would you say some of the challenges are? Clearly working initially as a staff person, but then moving into management and overseeing several individuals, such as a chief perfusionist, as you were for the majority of your career.
Well, when I started at Mercy, there was one other person functioning as a perfusionist. She was a nurse, and I guess you could say she was the chief, but there were only two of us, so I knew more about perfusion than she did. But she had worked there longer than me, so I guess she was recognized as being in charge of our two-person department. And I worked that way for quite a few years. And like I say, in 1986 or 86, I got a nursing degree, so I was doing other things. So in 1990, when I went back to school, I got certified. And right after that, in the early 1990s, when insurance came along, and a hospital, its services kind of exploded because we were getting all kinds of patients then. Instead of heart patients being sent all the way to St. Louis, which was the closest place besides Kansas City, we kept up most of them in Kansas City. And at that time, we started hiring some additional perfusionists, and I think there were two or three. We had a staff of two or three. When I got back from school, the old perfusionist that was there, that gal that was a nurse I worked with for so many years, she retired from perfusion. She didn't want to have anything to do with it anymore. So Dr. Holder made me the chief, and I hired one or two other people within that time span until about the early 90s, when we started doing many, many more cases. We went from about 200 cases a year to about 500 cases a year. So I had to hire more staff then. And you should know, because I hired a bunch of your students that did rotation through our program. So they were great. Your students were always great. And I wish I could have hired more, but I only had room for so many.
Well, I don't mean to puff Gary up, but Gary is also the recipient of numerous awards. We're going to get into some of them in a little bit, but he was also an outstanding faculty member at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. And I left there many years ago, but I assume that continued right up until Gary retired in 2014. But let's follow that train of thought, Gary. I'm glad you brought that up, because you have been a consummate teacher. You've been involved in multiple perfusion education programs. Even today, you're still on faculty of 7 programs, and you've won numerous awards for your outstanding teaching and mentorship. Talk about that, and how important is mentorship now in the realm of perfusion, both what you initially experienced, and give us your thoughts about today with those of us who are perhaps still out practicing. How important is being a good mentor to individuals, not only who are students, but are recently entered the field?
Well, I would like to, you say run awards. I think one of the most proudest awards we got, hospital, it wasn't just me, but the other staff, was your students gave us the award for the best clinical rotation they had. And I was very proud of that, because I was always, one thing, being a pediatric program, a lot of students, when they go to their pediatric rotation, they just watch. They don't do anything. But I always tried to get our students into cases and have them do hands-on cases. They stood over them the whole time. We never left them alone, but they actually ran the pump, used the clamps, did the calculations, and they really loved it. Most of them really liked working in peds. Everybody was kind of afraid when they came to it, but once people that got started in it, they loved it. So what was the other part of your question there?
Well, just what are the challenges that a perfusionist today who's wanting to mentor an individual, either a student or even a practicing perfusionist. Many of the perfusionists, as you've mentioned, that you hired were right out of school. I mean, they were definitely green behind the ears. And so, that's a very difficult situation and scenario in best of hands in the pediatric realm. That's got to be very, very challenging. So how did you address that? I mean, let's say you had a new perfusionist right out of UNMC or one of the other programs, and how would you address that individual coming into such a dynamic pediatric practice as you've had at Children's Mercy?
Well, I try and pick, if I was hiring somebody, I try and pick somebody who I really felt had a sense of responsibility and really wanted to do it. Uh, all your students were like that. But even when I hired other people, they came in, I hired them because they were enthusiastic about what they wanted to do. They would listen to what I had to say. Didn't hire anybody that said, "Well, I do it this way." One thing I tried to do is get everybody online and do everything almost the same. There wasn't a lot of flexibility outside of the techniques that we wanted them to do. And there are other places where perfusionists run a pump the way they want to run it, and other people do it in the same place a completely different way. We never did that. And one of the reasons we didn't was we wanted to track our quality control. We kept track of certain parameters that we used on the pump, and we compared perfusionists, the performance of perfusionists on the pump over a period of many, many years. So we were all trying to do things the very same way and get the same outcomes. And everybody was on board with that. People liked doing that. If they didn't want to do that, they didn't last very long. So I guess in that sense, I was pretty stringent, but nobody ever complained about it that I know of. Maybe behind my back they did, but and probably the key point we emphasized was safety. I thought in my early years as a perfusionist running a pump, like you see in the background there, that could be a death trap. It was, if you didn't know what you were doing, that was really terrible. Disc oxygenators were bad oxygenators. There were lots of pumps involved. Anesthesiologists really didn't know what was going on. And the surgeons, although the surgeons had run the pump at some point in their residency or fellowship, they felt like if they saw it run once, they knew everything there was to know about it, but they didn't. They didn't have any idea. So when we got into trouble, I expected that they were listening to me. And if they didn't listen to me, I made it sure that I was serious about what I was telling them that they needed to do. They needed to stop this or start this or change this or something. So it's pretty firm. If that's a trick, that's what I did.
Excellent, excellent, great answer, Gary. Gary, I'm going to shift a little bit here, but we're going to circle back several times during the interview, and I'd like to talk about your research. I remember years ago there was the oxygen pressure field theory, and this really gets to oxygen delivery. You've been a champion of oxygen delivery, anion gaps, veno-arterial carbon dioxide gradients, so many important parts of what goes on with the adequacy of perfusion, but it was really the OPFT. And I remember when you started publishing on this, I tell you, it was some of the most interesting research and difficult. I mean, I've read your papers numerous times, and it took several times before I think I even had a basic understanding of what you were trying to say. But you were presenting this all throughout the world, actually, and definitely across the United States, because there was so much interest in it. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about research. How did you initially move towards that? You were a very busy perfusionist. You were managing one of the busiest children's heart hospitals in the country, yet here you are doing research at the same time. How did that occur?
Well, anyway, that's my dog. I was involved. Helped start the ECMO program in '86 at my hospital. And by 1990, we'd done 100 or 120, I can't remember how many. And about 75% of them survived, but 25% of them died. And that really bothered me because when a child got meconium aspiration and we put them on ECMO, they didn't die from meconium aspiration. They died from a brain hemorrhage, or they died from renal failure, or they died from just organ failure, or something like that. Nothing to do with their original diagnosis. So that bothered me a lot. And then when I was out in Oregon uh, doing the certification class, I had to do a capstone project, and I came across an article by Popel that talked about August Krogh and his oxygen pressure field theory. And I'd never read anything about this before. I mean, I studied all the open heart parameters, oxygen delivery, oxygen carrying capacity, cardiac index. I knew all that stuff, but this oxygen pressure field stuff, I didn't know anything about it. I thought, well, this might have an answer to why patients die when you don't expect them to. And so I started studying that. And to make a long story short, I came up with two parameters that were really important. One was the anion gap, corrected anion gap, and the CO2 gradient. And when I used both these parameters to evaluate the patients, I could predict which ones were going to die uh, early in their process, or in the first 12 hours or so. So I would tell the surgeons and the neonatologists, I said, this kid's not going to make it. It's going to have a brain hemorrhage or something. And lo and behold, that happened. Those things occurred. And so the doctors were kind of dumbfounded. They would say, well, how can you predict that? And so I studied it and learned these two parameters and started using them, and I could predict what was going to happen. And the problem that I had was, what could I do about it? I knew that they were going to die, but I didn't know what to do about it. And then when we started ECPR, which was a few years later, it became even worse, because not only were patients just on high ventilator settings or post-op parts, but they were coming in shock, doing CPR, and we're trying to put them on ECMO and keep them alive. So I had to figure out why these two indicators were killing these patients, or were correlated to the death of the patients. And it all boiled down, in a nutshell, to reperfusion injury. If you take somebody who's in severe shock and put them on a heart-lung machine, then the reperfusion from the heart-lung pump will kill the patient. And so I started studying reperfusion injury, and I figured out these parameters that I was following were indicators that the patient was going to have reperfusion injury when you put them on pump. And then I had to figure out, well, how do you stop that? How do you prevent it? And then I learned all about using hypothermia, clear primes, low calcium. And an important aspect was dantrolene. We used dantrolene to block the calcium reperfusion injury that can occur, which is just as deadly as the oxygen. I couldn't ever understand, after I learned that, why they were still giving calcium to CPR patients. And I knew that their heart started again, the calcium was probably going to kill them. So that's kind of how I got started working with it. I wrote several articles, as you know, and you were the editor for a long time at Czech, and a lot of the articles came across your desk. And I just started reporting what I was seeing and what I was learning. And then just before I retired, I thought, well, shouldn't I write like a book or something about this and explain how I do these things? And some people recommend, don't write a book, because you're only gonna have so many editions, and they're going to be out of date pretty quick and everything. So I decided to start a web page and put all this stuff on a web page, and it could be accessed by anybody all over the world. It's a free educational web page called Perfusion Theory, and they can find the whole theory, oxygen pressure field theory, on that web page. And I've been contacted by quite a few people throughout there. I mean, I've had tens of thousands of hits on my whole web page, and thousands on the oxygen pressure field theory. And just last summer, a surgeon from Maryland contacted me. He's doing some work for the Army. They're trying to revive soldiers on the battlefield that had bled to death. And he's doing this with pigs. He was bleeding pigs out and then put them on pump and trying to revive them. And they were all dying. And he heard about this, and he talked to me about it. And I spent some time talking to him on the internet, not so much. Never went to Maryland to meet with him. I don't know anyway, what he learned was kind of a revelation to him. So he started trying to do it this way. I haven't been back in contact with him, so I don't know if his experiments have been successful since I suggested these techniques. but he was interested in it. So
Uh,
that's where the what most of my research was involved in that. Excuse me.
That's fine. Now, this is great, and it's a good segue because you've mentioned several times the word ECMO, and I think most individuals would understand what that is. But if anybody is listening or viewing this, as it's going to be posted on the AMSAC webpage, ECMO is extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. And Gary said he went. Well, he didn't say it, but I know he did. He went to Ann Arbor, which was the leading ECMO center in the world, definitely in the 80s, and trained there. Spent, I believe, it was a week in the ECMO course with Dr. Bartlett and his team. But you've also, as you just mentioned, instituted ECMO or was on the team that brought ECMO to Children's, and you spent your whole career really being an advocate for ECMO. And as you've just explained to us, you participated in the improvement of ECMO by understanding the physiologic aspects about oxygen delivery and obviously carbon dioxide um, um, removal during the ECMO procedure. But let's talk about ECMO for a second or two here. What do you see have been the greatest changes? You talked about obviously hemorrhage and some of the challenges that you experienced, but what did you see as some of the greatest changes back in the 80s and early 90s? And if you would be so kind, what do you think the challenges in the 2020s and even 30s might be for ECMO?
No, I don't know. That's a big question now. Uh, we were the 16th ECMO program to open. We did our first patient in February of 1987. We trained for a year using sheep in my hospital. We did one sheep a month, 12 months. And we didn't have any money for pumps. So I borrowed 3 hemodialysis pumps, or actually, they gave them to me from the St. Luke's Hospital where I used to work and converted them to ECMO pumps.
Hmm.
And the surgeon I worked for said, "Don't worry, we're never going to do anything bigger than a baby." So these pumps were all designed to run babies and or lambs. And like I said before, the things that bothered me about how the patients were dying that bothered me. Excuse me. Um, so anyway, we got better and better at it, and I started publishing on it, and I got comments from other people about how to do it, and people were having more and more success with it. I haven't looked at the ELSO results. I don't belong to that anymore, so I don't know how people are doing now. But they're putting people on ECMO or doing ECPR, which is a form of ECMO, on people that we would discard, we would never do in the past. Like if they bring, there used to be if they brought a transferred a patient, a baby from another hospital to our hospital, and they were doing CPR on it as they came in the door, we wouldn't put them on ECMO. But we were just got to the point where the neonatologist wanted said we can't just let these kids die. We got to try and save them. So we did more and more difficult cases, a lot of post-op hearts, not a lot of them. With anybody that wouldn't wean off bypass got to be on ECMO. Nobody died in the OR anymore. It used to be we had a lot of pediatric deaths in the OR, and they would baptize them in the OR before we turned on the pump. It was very sad. But once ECMO came around, anybody wouldn't wean from the pump, they got on ECMO. And we just got better and better at it. I learned a lot more about it using understanding this oxygen pressure field theory concept. And I don't know what else I could say. In the future, there, like I say, one of the things in the future, this surgeon wants to do try and revive soldiers that died from bleeding to death on the battlefield. Well, I can see in the future people on the highway who are killed on the highway, maybe by bleeding or by some other problem. They're trying to revive those people in ERs using the pump, using special reperfusion techniques in the pump. Instead of just saying they're dead at the scene, they start doing CPR or something, or cooling them off or something, like drowning people now. They if they kids drown, they leave them cold. They don't try and warm them up while they're doing CPR. They leave them cold until they get them on pump, and then try and revive them there. So I can see ECPR coming along where they try and revive patients we've never thought we could revive in the past. So that's what I see the future coming down to, especially trauma units where they get a lot of trauma coming in from one thing or another, and the patients are declared dead, but they might not be declared dead until they spent some time on the pump. So that's going to happen in the ER, not necessarily the ICU or the surgery.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Gary, and it sure is something that's exciting because that classification of patients really never were considered for ECMO. So that's something that I think you're exactly spot on. That we'll see hopefully in the next few years. I'm going to go ahead and embarrass you now, so you don't have to say anything. But awards. Clearly, Gary has said it so many times so far in this interview. You don't do this for the rewards or to the recognition per se. You do it for the patient's benefit, as Gary has devoted his whole life to. But in that comes recognition. Gary is the recipient for clinical excellence in nursing as a perfusionist. Most individuals who receive that award usually are not wearing two hats, a nurse and a perfusionist. Gary was doing both, which is remarkable, probably unprecedented at Children's. He also, with his work in ECMO, has received the Excellence in Life Support Award multiple times, he and Children's Hospital. But for our professional society, AMSAC, Gary has received every major award as a perfusionist, the Award of Excellence, Perfusionist of the Year, Research Award, and more recently, the Gibbon Award, which is the highest honor that is bestowed upon individuals. You don't have to be a perfusionist. There are many surgeons who have won this award. I believe a few anesthesiologists and a handful of perfusionists, and Gary has received that. So there's no question there, Gary. I just wanted to relay to individuals who are watching this or maybe hearing it, the remarkable contributions you have made. But I want to switch for a second here and talk about safety. You've said it several times, and I think the latter part of your career, and clearly now, has mainly focused on safety and perfusion. Talk a little bit about what you've done with the AMSAC Safety Committee and the wonderful work, the wonderful information published on the AMSAC website, the webpage, that you were the primary author of.
Well, there was an article, and I can't remember the name of the authors. I'm terrible because I'm so old I can't remember names anymore. But it was about FMEA's, failure modes and effects analysis, using during open heart surgery with the pump. And this actually was a student paper that was done. He was a student down in Arizona. Anyway, I was very impressed by this. And the reason I was is because throughout my career, I had always tried to train my staff perfusionists in the safety practices that I had used. And I realized this FMEA was a way that you could store experience so that other people could learn what you had benefited from, what you'd learned from. So I started writing this. And I also realized that after I retired, that there were a lot of retired perfusionists that could contribute to this. What an FMEA does is it recognizes or identifies something that could fail, and then it says why it could fail or how it could fail, and if it fails, what's it going to do to the patient, and then how do you keep it from failing? How do you mitigate it or deal with the failure? And then lastly, you rank it. Is it an important failure? Is this something that's going to occur frequently, or is it extremely rare? And I got several of the retired perfusionists to participate in this. I would give them a problem and say, okay, here's a patient. There's a risk of an air embolus in this patient. How do you deal with it? And they would say, well, if you get an air embolus, it's going to do this to the patient, and here's how I prevent it. And so they helped me write these things. And I wrote, I think about 50 of them for heart surgery, and then I think another 25 or so for ECMO safety, and put those on, got them there on AMSAC website. I forgot who asked me. Anyway, so I'm beginning to sound like a politician. So I was very interested in safety and conveying the things I had learned about safety and how to predict problems and prevent problems before they happen. I was not a big fan of the incident reporting system. I like the one that they have in Australia. That's pretty good. But AMSEC started their incident reporting system, and I wasn't very happy with that because it doesn't teach people anything. I don't think. I mean, it reports an air embolus or something. So what? I mean, how do you deal with it? It's better to prevent the air embolus, and with FMEAs, you know what to look for and how to prevent it and how to deal with it before it happens and how to rank it and how to risk it. And then when you have all these risks outlined and you can put your highest risk issue at the very top of your thing and say, how can we fix this? What can we do? Can we buy some equipment? We have to have further training. What do we do in our program? And that's something an incident reporting system can't do. So I got them on the AMSEC website, and I'm not part of the safety committee anymore, but I think the failure modes are still on the AMSEC website.
Yes, they are absolutely a very prominent part of it. Gary, let me ask you a question now about some personal characteristics. Clearly, you epitomize what a professional should be in our field and nursing as well. But what characteristics or attributes do you feel would be most important to being an outstanding perfusionist today?
Well, I think you want to make a difference in people's lives. Not everybody wants to do that. Some people want to go into finance or become a politician or something, make a lot of money. But I think people who are dedicated uh, to making a difference in people's lives, I think that's the first thing you want to have as a perfusionist. And then you have to have persistence because you're learning, you're never going to stop learning. You learn every day, every year, every challenge that you have to meet all the time. So you got to have persistence. You got to be willing to work strange hours. Maybe it's not so bad now, but back when I did it, I used to, the surgeons I worked for, when I was there by myself, they might be two, sometimes three open heart operations in a day. And then the next surgeon would come by and he'd start his day and he would do two operations. And I was the guy who worked the 24 hours in a row. I was the perfusionist that ran all those cases for those guys. So you got to be willing to do that. There's a really good copied an article from her, Eileen Heller Standing, and put it on my website about being a perfusionist on holiday in Thanksgiving. And it's a very profound article. So if you go to the website and read it, look at it, look that one up. It's really good. And she talks about the dedication you have to have, not only with your family, but being a perfusionist to try and make a difference in other people's lives. So if you don't want to do that, if you're not interested in that, you probably wouldn't make a very good perfusionist.
Oh, well said, well said. Let's talk a little bit just for a minute or two about giving back and how do we as perfusionists, how did you as a perfusionist contribute to the community spirit? Obviously right now in your retired state, and I think I'm going to have to send you the definition for retired because you're doing more work now than I believe you've ever done. But how important it is to contribute back, whether to the perfusion community or from a social perspective to our local communities, through volunteering and other altruistic behaviors. You've demonstrated it, but how, if you had to rank that, how high would that be in your list of top attributes for an individual to possess to be an outstanding perfusionist?
Well, I think when I retired, I wanted to stay active in some way. I didn't want to pump cases anymore. I didn't want to take call anymore. That was a lot of work, and I was getting older, and it was harder to do. So when I retired, I wanted to stay active. So I started a website, like I told you, and I put a lot of stories on the procedures I did and the stories I did. The students that would come down to the hospital all the time would always want to hear perfusion war stories. Tell us what you did then, and what was it like then? How did you handle that situation? And they wanted to hear these stories. So I thought, well, I'll put them on the website. And also the website is where I put the oxygen pressure field theory, where people can go from all over the world. I've had hundreds and maybe thousands of downloads of it all over the world. So that was better than a book. It doesn't cost so much to have a website, but And that kept me active. And then one day I got a phone call from David Webb. I had been asked to lecture many times for the people at SUNY and Arizona and other places and give individual lectures on safety and other aspects. But David Webb called me up and he said, I want you to come help me at Lipscomb University. We're starting a new school. So I said, I can't come there. What do you want me to do? He said, well, you can just do distance classes. And so I started teaching the pathophys class there. And now I'm teaching the capstone class for them. And so it just keeps me active. I feel kind of bad because so much about perfusion education now is simulation, and all the new pumps and stuff that people are using. I don't know much about that. I don't know much about running those computerized pumps and that kind of stuff. So, but I try and give people the benefit of the experience they had, and tell them not to make the same mistakes I made in the past to avoid mistakes. So, and so it's fun. I don't have to work very hard at it, but I enjoy the communing with the patient, with the students. Had uh, four students contact me today about a project they were working on, and it's nice to wake up and look at your email and somebody would think you're still useful for something.
Gary, we're almost at the top of the hour, but I have a question that's a personal one, and I think by you sharing this with so many of us, those of us who are retired or those of us who are just starting in the field, it would really mean a lot. And what, if you had to say in your own words, what did you enjoy the most about being a cardiovascular perfusionist for basically over 5 decades?
Well, I think the thing I enjoyed the most was the daily challenge, because you never knew what was going to happen as a perfusionist. You hope that things will go routinely, there won't be any problems, but you also know that there could be something that could happen that could ruin a patient's life. And so I think it was just a daily challenge. No 2 days were ever the same. They're all different. Some were horrible. Most of them were good. We're happy, got good outcomes. So I think it's just a daily challenge, knowing I'm not going out to sell shoes to people or try and make some money in the stock market. And when I saw a baby survive and a person take the baby, one of the most interesting cases I ever did. I believe that I saw a lot of miracles in my lifetime. And people survived, but I didn't think they would survive. And one was a case, it was a post-op baby who wouldn't wean off bypass, and we put him on ECMO, and I was sure that he was going to die. He's on ECMO for about 5 days, and his numbers were looking worse and worse and worse, and I was sure he's going to die. And the parents were there every day, and one night it was time for them to go home. They needed to get some sleep, and I was manning the pump that night, and they had a CD recorder, and they were put in a CD player to play lullabies for the baby just before they left to go home to get some rest. And it played some lullabies, and then it got to the lullaby, Jesus Loves Me, on the lullaby. And there it stuck. It kept playing that over and over and over again all night long. And I talked to the bedside nurse. I said, do you think we got to turn this off? It's playing the same lullaby over and over. And she said, I'm not turning it off. You turn it off. I'm not going to turn it off. And so when the parents came back in the next morning, they heard this thing. It was still playing the same lullaby over and over. Jesus loves me. This I know. And they said, looked at me and said, was that been playing all night? And I said, yeah. He says, well, why didn't you turn it off? And I said, well, I thought maybe you wanted it to. There's some kind of prayer that you're trying to say for the baby or something. He said, no, it's broken. So he turned it off. And I was amazed because that day, that baby improved so much that we took him off ECMO that night, and eventually he went home alive. And uh, that case has affected me all these years. That was probably one of the earliest ECMO cases I did. So that's something you take home with you every day, knowing that you did a good job and you helped save a person's life.
Wow. Wow. I would not ask another question. I think that was a beautiful way to end this this pioneer, remarkable individual, Gary Grist, good friend of mine for decades, and somebody I admire tremendously. So, with that, Gary, with your permission, AMSAC would like to publish this interview in the Pioneers of Perfusion archive on the webpage.
Sure.
And I can't wait to get it out there and share it with many individuals, not only throughout the United States, but throughout the world. So with that, again, on behalf of AMSAC, Mark Carews, the entire history committee, I want to thank you for sharing your experiences with us and look forward to the publication. So thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Al.